Good evening. Welcome to the Thursday evening update on the tropics here. As always, these thoughts are mine alone and in making decisions regarding now Tropical Storm Ida here, located in the Western Caribbean. Please refer to the National Hurricane Center, your local National Weather Service office, and your local government for all the latest information and information regarding evacuation zones and what you need to do to prepare for Ida as this comes towards you over the next couple of days here. Well, as we look at the wide shot here, we have quite a bit going on in the Atlantic. Thankfully, the only thing threatening land is Ida, but we do have Invest 97L here, located in the central subtropical Atlantic, and then Invest 98L here, both very well removed from land and will likely not threaten land within their lifetime. But in case they do, we may be able to talk about this. But right now, it seems pretty unlikely that these will be threatening land in any kind of way. So here we are. We're going to be talking about Ida here as this advances off to the northwest. As we go forward, you can see the sun is beginning to set on our system, so it's a little difficult to see some of the stuff, but here we can see that our system is pretty well defined at the mid-levels. You can see a pretty obvious mid-level circulation here located to the west of Jamaica, but there is a little bit of tilt in the vortex here. Recon found the lower level center to be off to the southwest of this mid-level center, and if we look at the cloud entities as the sun goes down here, you can see cloud entities in these collapsing thunderstorms that are generally being pushed out of the southwest, and this is due to our upper level trough here that we've been dealing with for the past couple of days here, imparting southwesterly flow over the Western Caribbean. And while this trough is much weaker and is being killed by the heat release of Ida that we talked about yesterday, and the continuing to expand outflow of Ida, there is still some flow that is undercutting the system that is causing a little bit of asymmetry, but this is mainly just an imperfection in the current organization of the system. If you look at recon data here, you can see that we still do have a pretty well-defined wind shift here, and this is definitely a tropical cyclone. This is not a mid-level or a lower-level trough axis anymore. You can see very clear that there are westerlies and northwesterlies, indicating that we have a rather healthy circulation here. And this lower level spin may be able to get tugged under this mid-level center here as time goes on. You can see a little bit of a kink in the rather uniform flow to the northeast of the system, indicating that there may be a little bit of a formation to the north and east. And this is typical of storms that are sheared in the mid-levels. If their lower level center is a little bit removed and the mid-level center is healthy enough, you can generally get some reformations to the north and east here as this is moving off to the northwest. And so while this is occurring, we should only be expecting gradual strengthening at this point. This is not going to rapidly intensify tonight here, but it is going to be organizing as time passes here. So we may have a pretty significant tropical storm by the time this is affecting Cuba, but this is not expected to be a hurricane by the time it reaches Cuba. It does not have enough time to reach that strength as it is advancing off to the northwest. It only has about a day here, and it is seemingly unlikely that we are going to be dealing with a hurricane in Cuba. So only tropical storm warnings are in effect for the western tip of Cuba here. If we go to the GFS model, we're going to go back a bit here. And here we are with our tropical storm Ida here, and you can see the upper level outflow expanding out of the system here off to the north, and you can see our upper level trough here that is decaying rather quickly. And as we go forward here, this is just kind of to show the upper level environment that we're going to be dealing with. Now that it is pretty well defined and we have a well defined center here, we have a little bit more consistency in terms of the track of the system. And this has evolved rather quickly given the uncertainty of how elongated the trough axis was coming into the Western Caribbean here. But now we do have a bona fide storm, so expect track forecast to not shift too much now. It really depends on this last major kink in the forecast here, which is where exactly it enters the Eastern Gulf of Mexico here. And The GFS is on the northern side of the guidance envelope, but it has become rather concentrated and pointed generally off to the northwest and coming out of Cuba as it enters the southeastern Gulf of Mexico here, and this would indicate that our system would likely be heading towards Louisiana. We'll talk about that in a minute. But here you can see that the upper level environment is rather favorable for Ida's continued intensification. Here you can see the upper level anticyclone ventilating the system. There is a little wrinkle in this environment here. You can see Tropical Storm Nora here intensifying off the Mexican coast is also producing quite a bit of upper level outflow and is pushing what is left of this upper level trough here, the little kink in the flow here that you can see. This is the upper level trough, and it's not much of anything anymore. But you can see our upper level anticyclone is just a little displaced off to the east of Ida. And this is because of the flow that Nora is imparting upon the upper level anticyclone. So what this would do is create a southeasterly component to the upper level flow that may be able to shear the system just a little bit, but this is in line with the storm's motion, so it would not be enough to really stop the strengthening of the system. It just may be able to cap the system and not have it become insanely strong. It would still be a rather strong hurricane here in this particular solution, as the GFS does forecast this along with practically every other model. But it would be a wrinkle in the overall favorable environment that we will be dealing with when the storm enters the Gulf. And you can see here that the flow remains rather light over the system, even though the upper level anticyclone is displaced off to the east still. You can see that this flow is rather light, and it's still under this anticyclone. It's not on the outer edges here, which would be right around here, and it's not going to ever reach the outer edges of that anticyclone. So this is likely to be very well ventilated. You're going to see a lot of outflow, a lot of high cirrus being pushed over the southeastern United States as the system moves off to the northwest here, and this is going to look pretty menacing in the Gulf as this comes forward here. And it really depends on where exactly this is when it crosses Cuba, and where it is will play a rather crucial role in determining how fast it is, one, and who gets the landfall here. Right now, kind of zoned in on Louisiana here being the primary landfall point for Ida. I definitely would still not count out the far upper Texas coast and the eastern part of the Alabama coast here and parts of the Florida Panhandle. It's not going to curve into the Florida Panhandle like this. It would mainly be moving off to the northwest at this point, and that is going to remain the case regardless of what happens, because if we go to the mid-level flow here, you have this mid-level ridge here developed that is going to move off to the west here in tandem with the system here. You can see as we go forward, you have the ridge kind of settles in here over the Carolinas, and you can see that if the system is closer to the ridge, you can see that the mid-level flow is a little bit stronger here. You're seeing these 20-knot wind barbs here. But if you go a little further to the south and west, you can see that the flow is a little weaker here. That's 15 knots on those wind barbs, and if that is what is on top of the system rather than the 20-knot wind barbs, then we would have a little bit slower of a system here. And you can see that it's going into an area where there's not a whole lot of steering flow here. Only 5 knots out of the southeast. But this would be a consequence of the system coming out of the southwestern tip of Cuba rather than the peninsula here of Cuba. So still a little bit to iron out, but it is coming a lot easier now to forecast this system here. If we go to the GEFS ensemble here, you can see what we're talking about. We now have a very good consensus on where the system is. It's practically right here. Bulk of the ensembles are pretty well oriented here. And as we go forward here, you can see that as it approaches Cuba, there is a little bit of a split here, but it is generally in this area. And there's not really a whole lot of divergence in the models or the ensembles here, as the system will very likely be taking a generally northwestward motion here towards Cuba. And so where it enters the eastern Gulf of Mexico here is rather crucial. You can see all these models now. There's just still a little bit of a spread here. And this is why I said that the Gulf Coast is still, the northwestern Gulf Coast here is still in play. But as you can see, we still have a pretty hefty agreement here along the models, and you have a little bit of a slower movement on the western part of the or western group of ensembles here. And as we go forward, you can see that this western group is a little delayed. And you can see we're in Sunday morning right now. And you can see that the storm is already practically on shore here on the northeastern group of the ensembles here. But if you talk about the western camp here, you can see that it is still well offshore and is moving still to the northwest, and this is because it is a little further from the ridge, and that affects storm motion in a minute way, but it is significant enough for delays and impacts depending on where you're at. But if you're in central Louisiana, this is 1 p.m. on Sunday here, you can see, and if you're in this central camp here, and within this region, you're probably going to be dealing with this system sometime Sunday, and definitely need to be preparing now for this system, as this is going to be a pretty significant hurricane by the time it reaches the Gulf Coast. And you can see as we move forward, the ensemble mean is still rather broad, but it really depends on where exactly it is right here. And we're going to have to wait another 24 hours for that to iron itself out. And when that happens, we're going to have a lot more certainty on where exactly this storm is going to be. But remember that this is going to be a rather large storm here. This is not going to be a small tropical cyclone that affects a small region. This is going to be rather large, and a larger system means that here, if we look at our cone, that if we have, it goes down this track, but we have effects well outside of the cone here. And you definitely need to be preparing for this, even if you're not in the cone explicitly here, because this is just a kind of group of center tracks here. This is the western edge of the possible center track, and this is the eastern edge of the possible center track here. And so imagine that the western solution here, and you have our system that is imposed over a large area, and you can see that there's hypothetically speaking, there would be a system that is affecting well outside of the forecast cone. So if you're in Houston, you still need to be watching this just a little bit here. It's looking increasingly likely that this is not going to hit the upper Texas coast. It's really zeroed in on Louisiana right now, but there is an outside chance that this could enter the Gulf of Mexico on the southern side of the guidance envelope here, and that would move the system generally off to the northwest and maybe slow it down a little bit here. But that is one side, and the other side, of course, is the eastern side here, and that would promote faster movement and maybe a little less time over water here. But regardless, there is a loop eddy that the center track is expected to go over, and that would likely promote rapid intensification depending on how well developed the storm is when it enters the eastern Gulf of Mexico here. There's still a lot to iron out, but if it is a well-structured tropical cyclone, rapid intensification is explicitly forecast for this system as it approaches the coast, and this would likely be intensifying all the way up until landfall, as the environment is very favorable and the sea surface temperatures remain very favorable all the way up to the landfall point, regardless of where it ends up making landfall, whether it ends up making landfall in Mississippi, Louisiana, or the Louisiana-Texas border here. Sea surface temperatures are very favorable all the way up to the coast. And so if you are in the area where the forecast cone is, you need to be preparing for this, taking this very seriously, listening to everything that your local government tells you to do. And if there is a mandatory evacuation order for your area, please do heed it. This is a very serious situation. The National Hurricane Center expects this to be near major hurricane strength by the time it makes landfall here somewhere along the Louisiana coast or the northwestern Gulf Coast here. And it could go up this intensity forecast could go up. There are already tropical storm warnings here for Cuba, so if you're in Cuba, you do need to be preparing for this. And if you're in the Cayman Islands, go ahead and be wary of the possible effects of the system here. But if you're along the northern Gulf Coast here, north central Gulf Coast, northwestern Gulf Coast, northeast central Gulf Coast here, please do be preparing and go ahead and keep a very close eye on this system, as this is about 3 days away now. This is going to be a weekend event here, and the intensity forecast could increase, it could decrease, but that doesn't really matter too much. The bottom line is that there will likely be a strong hurricane heading directly towards the north central Gulf Coast here, and if you are in this region, please do be preparing. The danger of this is pretty significant, and this is definitely going to be a pretty significant event here, regardless of what exactly happens. So have a plan in place, and go ahead and listen to the National Weather Service in New Orleans, National Weather Service in Lake Charles, National Weather Service in Gulfport, Mobile, and National Weather Service even in Houston and Galveston here. Please do be taking this seriously. That's all I got for now. Thanks for watching. I'll have another video out tomorrow discussing Ida here, and hopefully we'll have a lot more certainty regarding the track. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching.